prophecy, or this is coming from the Defense News. The story that you're about to hear is going to be, well, let's just say, I want you to take a seat. They cut off Israel's defense spending for the Iron Dome today. House Democrats, according to this article from the Defense News, cut off the spending for protecting Israel. And the Democrat from Michigan, I don't even want to repeat it. I'm just going to put the article in below because this is going to be a loaded topic. And I'm going to start off by saying this. If you haven't learned by now, we've been talking about what would be the events that would lead up to the return of the Lord. This would be it. The hand of protection off of America is truly going to be taking off our protection. I mean, we're blessed because of our protection over Israel. Let me read to you Revelation 12. The woman, the child, and the dragon. Now a great sign appeared in the heaven, and the woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and a head of garland and 12 stars. Then being with child, she cried out in labor and the pain to give birth. Another great sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fiery red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems in the heads. And the tail threw back the third of the stars in heaven, and threw them to the earth. The dragon stood before the woman, who was ready to give birth, to devour the child. And as soon as it was born, she bore a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and his throne. Then the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has had a place prepared by God that would feed her there for 1,260 days. This is where we're at. If you want to know the translation of that, that's where we're at in Scripture. And you should know who the dragon is and what's going on at the UN at the same time. And it just all happened today. So we're coming upon Feast of Trumpets, which is last year they didn't calculate it right. They said that the barley harvest was not completely right, but they did it because they didn't want to mess up the calendar, but it did anyway. So apparently now we're actually a month behind, okay? And they celebrated Feast of Trumpets a month early, and it was a summer month. So you have a lot of people celebrating Feast of Trumpets twice, okay? And that's not hard to believe because people celebrate New Year's Eve twice. Some people celebrate Chinese New Year and New Year's, so what, right? But in this case, there's a second Feast of Trumpets, which is October 7th and 8th. And I'm speaking to that person that's not saved. All it takes is the rest of the people to be saved, to be ready to go. This is a prophecy alert. And what you see here in this image is from the AP. And what the Iron Dome represents is to protect Israel from attacks. And when you cut off the spending completely and then you start helping the Taliban, you can pretty much figure out what's going on. The Biden administration's whole plan is now to turn its back on Israel completely, like not support Israel at all. You don't need an interpreter for that, you know. So this is what's going on, and this is the scripture that I just read to you is Revelation 12. I couldn't believe I'm actually reading this scripture, and I'm stunned because at first it's upsetting, and then at the same time it's exciting because we're at this point now that if you want to ask one important question where you're at in your journey in life, like if you have a whole different religious belief system, what would you think about this? I'm just curious for that person that's not a believer, and you were to read the headlines about Israel right now, because you don't exactly have to be a Christian to know that cutting off spending to an ally who's relied on your protection from your enemies over across the Middle East. And now I think the best question to ask now is they won't have the shielding and protection that they have. And this goes to the part of the scripture I want to read to you again, where she is in travail. And that's going to be the story of this post, is that will Israel be in travail over this? And that sounds like the story here. And I want to thank you again for listening to my post, because that is the story. And I will put the description and the post below.